Arabic is the official language of more than 27 countries, and there are more than 400 million speakers of the language worldwide. Yet in the US, for example, less than 1% of students study Arabic. Studies have shown that those who speak a second language not only earn more, but are in higher level positions than their monolingual counterparts. And there's no shortage of studies that point to the benefits of students at the K-12 level learning a new language. The National Research Council in 2007 found that children who study a foreign language show greater cognitive development in areas such as mental flexibility, creativity, and higher order thinking skills. Qatar Foundation International inspires meaningful connections to the Arab world by creating a global community of diverse learners and educators, connecting them through effective and collaborative learning environments inside and outside the classroom. Qatar Foundation International builds bridges across cultures by increasing the number of K-12 students in the Americas and the United Kingdom with a good knowledge and understanding of Arabic language and culture by increasing the number and quality of Arabic programs in state and public charter schools in the United States and other countries. Qatar Foundation International supports the teaching of the Arabic language through grant-giving and programming activities while increasing and professionalising the supply of highly qualified teachers of Arabic, thus raising the visibility of a growing profession through grants, professional development and free online resources. For more information on free teaching materials and available grants, please go to qfi.org and ispeakarabic.com. Hello everyone, and welcome to this second part of the ASU GSV Summit series of 10 episodes on the Edtech Podcast. This week we're talking about educating for 21st century skills. I'm in 3 separate conversations with Richard O'Donnell, founder and CEO of Skills Fund, Pierre Dubuc, co-founder at Open Classroom, and Tom Andriola, CIO and Vice President at the University of California. We touch upon accreditation, funding, project-based learning, and higher and alternative education such as bootcamps along the way. And if you like what you hear, you can check out more 21st century skills content from the ASU GSV Summit team, including videos and podcasts on this topic in our show notes, weekly email, or via the ASU GSV Summit website, asugsvsummit.com. Features include LinkedIn, Snapchat and Year Up talking about the next generation of talent, and Andrew Ng from Stanford University and Coursera talking about the impact of AI. Not to be missed. This week's episode is also set up nicely by the OECD's previous announcement that the next round of PISA tests in 2018 will measure global competency and cultural awareness. Whilst researchers like Alina von Davier come up with ways to help measure these diverse skills, partnerships like that between Arizona State University and the Asia Society are working to create curriculum resources and training for teachers to deliver global competency lessons. Whilst LinkedIn CEO announced at ASU GSV Summit that they would partner with Everfi to deliver compassion curriculums to US primary schools. That's so nice! But first, before we kick off with this week's episode, here's Michael Moe with a GSV partner's perspective on 21st century skills to set us up for this week's episode.
Throughout history, whether in pre-industrial or industrial times, great nations developed based on their access to physical resources and their ability to surmount physical barriers. It was really physical assets that led to advantages and success. In the global-based knowledge economy we're in, it's really your brain power. It's what you know. It's intellectual capital and human capital, which drives advantages and success. Fundamental to this, you're looking at the great businesses of today. It's all about how they obtain, train, and retain talent. That's a fundamental focus that every corporation is looking at. The most valuable media company in the world, it doesn't have any of its own content. That's Facebook. You look at the largest lodging business in the world, it doesn't own any of its own rooms. That's Airbnb. The largest transportation company in the world doesn't have any of its own cars. That's Uber. But what they do have is they have knowledge and technology that's driving their success. And so, we're really entering a new era. The competitive advantages are driven by your creativity, your ingenuity, and human capital that you have at your organization. Automation and technology is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for many, many years. John Maynard Keynes in 1930 talked about this new technological unemployment. It goes back to 200 years ago, 98% of all jobs in the United States were agriculture related. And then you had this shift of different automation technology effectively replacing those jobs. But what technology does is it replaces jobs, but it doesn't replace work. So as sure as the sun comes up in the east, we know that automation is going to continue to take away current jobs, but a whole new series of careers and jobs will be created. So historically, it was the degree that provided the currency for people to get future opportunity. It was really that ticket to ride. And while I believe that the degree will remain an important component of representing what you know and your credentials, for an opportunity, it's going to be augmented by a variety of ways that people are able to represent what they know, what their knowledge is, what their skill is, what their capabilities are. And I think that's a great thing. And through big data and other ways that people are going to be able to create their own knowledge portfolios and knowledge maps, that's going to be really the way that this exchange between your ability and what the opportunities are is going to be developed. And so we think that's wildly exciting, and it also creates challenges. And I think the companies that find ways to facilitate this and the people that adapt to this are the ones that are going to have the greatest success. When you look at the traditional model of higher education, it's basically give us your money, we'll give you a degree, and that turns into a decent job. What's happened increasingly is the cost of university has gone up over 3 times inflation for the past 40 years. And that worked okay when effectively if you graduate from college, you had a much better chance of getting a high-paying job. That relationship has changed pretty dramatically, coupled with the fact that now students in the United States have taken on more debt, $1.2 trillion, which is larger than the credit card industry. And so this relationship needs to change. And I think you're seeing companies like Coursera, which coupled with the previous point about it's what you know, not where you go, it's knowledge, not college, that is critical for what creates opportunity. Coursera is a leading MOOC with 27 million students, is able to basically reach people to provide them high quality courses at little or no cost, and being able to demonstrate that you complete a course, gain knowledge, that's translating into opportunity. That's wildly disruptive to the traditional system, and we think, again, good for society, good for the people that participate in it.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, here we go, episode 78, and let us know what you think via Twitter at Podcast Edtech or at ASU GSV Summit. Have a great week. Just come off of the main stage where I conducted the panel on gaming and neuroscience, which was great fun. And I'm delighted that Rick O'Donnell, founder and CEO of Skills Fund, has actually found the room that we're in today. So welcome, Rick. That was the first part of the challenge, which you succeeded in.
I did. It's a big venue here.
It is indeed. So first question, really, what's Skills Fund? How did you get involved with it? Obviously, you founded it. So when did you set it up and what was the motivation behind that, really?
Yeah, thank you. So great to be here, Sophie. So, Skills Fund motivation is partly based on the theory of follow the money. And what are the incentives in higher education that cause certain outcomes to happen? So I used to run the higher ed system for the state of Colorado, overseeing all the colleges and universities. I sit on the U.S. government's body that regulates all college accrediting agencies. And our sense is there's a big problem, at least in the United States, which is if an accrediting agency says that's a good college and gives it stamp of approval, and then suddenly students can take out all sorts of loans and debt and taxpayer money flows to it, and it turns out it's a horrible university, bad outcomes, low graduation rate. Nothing bad happens to the accreditor. And in fact, the accreditor is paid by the universities. So its incentive is never to unaccredit someone. It's insane. But nothing bad happens to this university, right? A university can take all these tuition dollars cash paying, debt paid. And if students drop out, get a degree that's worthless, nothing bad happens to the university. The only person harmed is the student. So a Skills Fund model is to change that. And so we actually are a quality assurance entity that underwrites the quality of innovative higher ed programs, software coding boot camps, cybersecurity boot camps, data science, and we do a whole comprehensive review of what are their outcomes, do their students graduate, and are really looking at what's the return on education. Should students spend their time and money at these schools? And if the answer is yes, then we will actually finance students to go to them. So we provide the money. And what we've done here is if we get it wrong and say that's a good school, but it's not, and students borrow from us and default on their loans, we're going to lose money. So suddenly our incentive is to only really put our seal of approval on the good schools. But we also, for every loan we disperse, make the schools put a portion of it into an escrow account, and it sits there until the loans are paid off. And so if a school takes all of this tuition money financed by us and has poor outcomes, the school is actually going to lose money before we do. So suddenly the accreditor, the lender, and the school all have real skin in the games around student outcomes.
So that's really interesting because I'm kind of fascinated by this financial aspects of higher education in the US. And I was talking to the guys from Mickelson Runway, and they were sort of talking about this model where, you know, students would start to pay back their loans as they started to work. And obviously we have that in the UK. So I was like, yeah, that's totally normal. But obviously here, I think it kicks in after even 6 months. You know, you have to start paying once you've graduated, whether you have a job or not, which just strikes me as quite terrifying, really. But I love the idea of Skills Fund and what you're doing. How will it tackle those existing accreditation services and setups where they're getting paid by the universities? Is the idea that, you know, you put a stake in the ground, people see, okay, this is a different model, and then you can start to scale that?
Well, so one, so we have students now coming to us saying, which school should I go to? I only want to go to school that you've accredited, in essence, approved, because they believe that we actually, since all of our money comes from whatever a student pays us, right? Our interest in the students are aligned. So students are coming to us, and so that helps create an incentive for schools to want to go through our quality assurance, and that's partly how we create demand and scale. And then the other thing we did, when we asked schools, what are your outcomes? How many of your graduates get jobs? And they would say, look, 90% of our students have jobs in 6 months. We quickly discovered, what does that mean? Full-time job, part-time
like
job?
Like in 7-Eleven or...
Yeah, and every school calculated it differently, and it was complex formulas. And so we've actually banded together with a group of about 40 schools, launched an initiative called the Council on Integrity and Results Reporting to make a simple one-page sheet that says, tell us what happened every student enrolled. So if 100 students enrolled, how many graduated on time, how many got full-time jobs in field for which they were trained, part-time jobs, out-of-field jobs, unemployed, at which time period and at what salary. And so we're bringing both transparency. And so again, students are coming to us saying, wow, I can actually compare schools to schools, and I don't have to guess that this school's outcomes are actually going to be worth my time and money. And so we're trying to build an ecosystem of schools and lenders and students around high return on education and not unknown or low return on education.
And what's quite interesting, I think, is that you're focusing on these perhaps alternatives. So I'm guessing some of those courses are within higher education institutions, but some of them are standalone kind of boot camps. And there's definitely a sense of it can be a bit cowboyish out there. So there's so many. So how do you work out, you know, which are a true alternative to going to university? And I mean, I think the other thing that I find interesting is Andreas Schleicher from the OECD. I heard him say that, you know, our graduates are coming out overqualified but underskilled. So they have these kind of big signified degrees, but they don't have the skills to actually, when they start day one, to know what the hell they're doing.
Right. Yeah. Well, so what I think is interesting is certainly, I think in the United States and even schools we work with that are going into Europe, into Australia and Asia, the boot camp, if you will, is disrupting graduate education to start with, right? So students are saying it's no longer worth 2 or 3 years and $50 to $200K to get a master's degree unless you're going to a top 10 program, right? I mean, if you can get into a top 10 program, it's more about networking and relationships. But outside of that, and that's 5% of the graduate students or less, they're like, wow, I could instead go to boot camp for 4 to 6 months, $20,000 or less, and I'm almost guaranteed a job at the end. And so I think the first disruption is happening at the graduate education level, which for many universities are the cash cow.
Yep.
And so that's going to be really interesting. I don't see yet widespread alternatives to the undergraduate education. I think that's harder to do. I think it's harder to convince parents that, what their son or daughter's doing is worth, is better than a traditional degree. I think it's coming, but I think that's probably a decade-long process.
Yeah. Interesting. And do you see a great amount of the students that enroll with Skills Fund, are they international?
Yeah. So I would say that of the schools we serve, it depends on the school, but probably 10 to 15% of their students are international students. But again, that part of the challenge is in the United States is visas. Since most of these alternative schools don't issue degrees, you can get a degree you can get a visa to come study for a degree program. I think it's harder to get a visa if you're not already here. If you're graduating from school, you can kind of extend your visa. So these don't fit the normal. Part of the challenge with changing higher ed is it's like employers. So we have a school that had to get accredited because employers will only reimburse students for tuition at accredited institutions. But the institution didn't want to be accredited. But it's just that employers have glommed on the degree ecosystem, as have the visa systems. And so breaking
the infrastructure
is really hard.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. It's following the money, right? Employer incentives and other things are what we're trying to break into by being a financing arm and not just a quality assurance arm.
And so you mentioned you used to work at the state of Colorado?
Correct.
Do you, in terms of your accreditation side of things, do you work with government to sort of help put a stamp of approval? Because on the panel I was just talking on, I think that's half the problem is you've just got such a myriad of services and tools out there. How do you kind of have that kite mark of quality and...
Yeah, we do. We spend a lot of time trying to educate state officials and federal officials, and part of the challenge is, traditionally higher ed's product has been degrees, right? So we had an agency that worked for me, and it was to stop diploma mills. So it was like, do you teach courses and teach the subject you're teaching, and can students graduate and get a certificate or degree? That was the question asked. It wasn't actually asked how many get jobs. And I think what you're seeing in higher ed is a change from the selling of degrees to the selling of outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so how you measure that is hard. I actually don't believe it's harder. I actually think it's easier because do you get a job or not for what you were trained for? And even if it's an undergraduate kind of liberal arts education, I still think you can say how many of your students had jobs that weren't part-time waged, service jobs that you didn't need to go to get a 3 or 4 year undergraduate degree for. Yeah. You can measure that, even if it's not in a specific vocational field.
It reminds me of in the UK, we have a coding bootcamp. I think it's like 12 weeks. And when part of how they sell it is, you will get a job at the end. And when their kind of cohort members get a job, there's a huge gong in their office, and they just, you can't really imagine that on sort of a university campus.
No, not at all. And part of the reason, like the boot camps, I think, are winning is if you think of a 12 or 6 month program that usually has a couple of cohorts, a boot camp school might have 5 to 10 graduating classes a year. And that's 5 to 10 times when they're getting feedback from employers of, is your curriculum relevant? Are the skills your graduates have up to speed? And so their iterative cycle time and feedback loop to improve their curriculum is leaps and bounds. Changing the curriculum at a traditional university, that's a multi-year project. And they're not always even listening to employers, they're listening to the disciplines. And so that just the mindset and the culture is so different that, the schools that are really focused on outcomes have an ability to not always, but are currently leapfrogging ahead of traditional institutions that even if they want to try, I know a lot of traditional institutions that really try hard to give their graduates, but they just can't meet the cycle times of institution that's going to graduate 10 classes a year.
I think what we'll see is universities will become, there'll be more modular learning as they try and realize they need to compete on that level. So this whole idea of sort of unpackaging degrees I think that's coming.
Yeah, I think it is. I think one of the questions though is like, what's the validation, right? If you believe a degree from a certain university confers something, if the university only offers a portion of that, are universities going to have to validate what they're packaging together, or is the brand dilution, like, are people going to stand behind whether it's University of Colorado degree or a Harvard degree at some level? If the vast majority of the education wasn't provided by that institution, are they just in essence a new form of accreditation rather than an actual institution delivering education?
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, like this idea of brand. And some of the big university brands are up there probably with some of the big kind of food and beverage brands in terms of recognition and people's association with them. So when you turned up, you mentioned that you'd had back-to-back meetings since 8:30 this morning. So I wondered from those meetings already if you had a sense of like what discussion topics are happening around ASU GSV this year, or which kind of focal points people are thinking about in 2017?
Yeah, it's still early, but I think I noticed a change last year at this summit, and I think it's continuing so far this year, which is much more focused on who's driving scalable results that are self-funding, right? So whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit kind of innovative education provider, it's no longer who's got the best technology or the best magic bullets or kind of the sexiness of edtech. I think that's all worn off.
Yeah.
And I think people are like, and it's great that you can show tremendous education gains or learning gains or outcome gains or whatever you're measuring with 50 students, 200 students. But can you scale it to 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 at a price that, like, who's going to pay it, right? Because at some point the venture money runs out, or the grant money runs out.
I'm so sick of seeing articles on top funded edtech companies. I just think that's like relatively interesting. I'm really keen to start seeing like which are actually either generating significant revenues or generating significant impact. But like you say, it's self-funded and perhaps it's a bit rough around the edges, but that's sort of taking off. I think that's far more interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. And so I just, both the entrepreneurs I'm chatting with and the investors, I mean, that's much more on people's mind than maybe it was a couple of years ago. And I think that's just maybe endemic, at least in the US, of the technology startup. I mean, even non-edtech startups, you read the press, like the Silicon Valley VC firms are much more focused on who's getting a cash flow, positive and and that there's just sort of cycles in investment. And I think you're in a much more show us the true results cycle portion of the cycle right now.
It's interesting. It'd be interesting to see by the end of like Wednesday whether I've heard that a few times. So I'll get back to you on that one. Final question. What resources, people or books do you go back to in terms of your thinking around what you're trying to do with Skills Fund, or perhaps in terms of setting that up and the challenges? Are there any things that have inspired you and sort of are integral to how you think about what you do in this space?
It's a really good question. I think so I'm a bit of a maverick, and my challenge, most of the books about higher ed are either how great the universities are and we just need to improve upon them, or how broken they are and they need to be destroyed. And I don't think either one of them quite get it, right? So I go back to books for inspirations of what not to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really good question. I mean, most of my research inspirations are just startup entrepreneur things and less higher ed as a whole.
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
So the particular founders that have inspired you, or teammates, or?
Yeah, I mean, my heroes are, I've got like they're Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett, people who created value in different ways, and understood that, Steve Jobs in my mind, right? He design and technology, right? We're trying to bring finance and education, like quality assurance, together in a new way. I think the most innovative companies usually get built upon, and if you think like the Clay Christian disruptive innovation, at some level, that's what Skills Fund is doing. We're playing on the margin. Most universities don't. Bootcamps are a minor thing that doesn't matter.
It's like an irritating fly there.
Yeah. But I look at it and think, they're eating your cash cow, which is called graduate education. They're coming for the main meal. And that's exciting, even if today you think, what are these 12-week programs? We do 5, 4, 6, 10-year degrees and PhDs. And so for me, it's inspiration of people who've gone around other industries and found ways to
change them from
from just picking one part of the value chain and then using that to grow and scale. I think, so that's kind of where I turn to for inspiration.
And if people want to connect with you and follow up when they listen to this, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just go to our website, skills.fund, and just you can email us from there. All our contact information is from there, and just reach out from us there. We'd love to hear you, and we always love to hear from schools and other finance partners and worldwide. We're doing a lot of cool stuff and love to make this grow bigger.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Rick.
Sophie, thank you.
So I'm here with Pierre Dubut, co-founder of Open Classrooms from France. So welcome, Pierre.
Thank you.
So we just had a bit of a chat, and basically you're here, you've been on panels, having lots of meetings, managed to acclimatise a bit via Florida from France. Can you tell all of our listeners what you're looking to achieve with Open Classrooms?
So Open Classrooms is a project I started with a co-founder called Mathieu. We started Open Classrooms 3.5 years ago. Our mission is very simple. It's to make education accessible. And 3.5 years ago, we started Open Classrooms, but it's a long story actually, because we started publishing online free courses back in 1999. So we were 6th graders and we started to build the courses which we had when we were at school. So we've been doing so for over 10 years as a hobby, and just a couple of years ago, we started and created the startup company. We're based in Paris, France. It's a 70-person team now, and what we do is that we improve our learners' employability. So we have students, we have employees, and we have job seekers taking online courses, basically MOOCs, but also fully online degrees. So our unique point at Open Classrooms is that we are a fully endorsed, accredited higher education institution. So we have degree awarding powers, and we can deliver bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in a fully online fashion.
That's really interesting. So I was speaking to a lawyer yesterday, and he was explaining to me the complexity of the term university. So, you can't, which is why Trump University got in trouble, because you can't call yourself a university unless you can award that particular degree. But do you suffer from the same kind of regulation strangleholds, or how do you go about accrediting and being accredited with that kind of legalese in the background?
It's an excellent question. So regulation, compliance, and accreditation are tough issues for us. So since we're based in France, we are endorsed by the French state. So we cannot call ourselves university in France because universities are only public in France. You cannot create a private university. It doesn't exist. So we are a so-called school, so a higher education institution, but we can ask for degree awarding power. So that is what we have right now. The main question for us right now is that we have 3 million students every month on our platform in 128 countries. So it's in English and French and Spanish. So we have students basically in almost everywhere in the world. And regulation in every country is different. And we have two main issues when it comes to regulation. One is the accreditation. So usually accreditation is very local. So you are accredited for your degrees only in one country. But also job markets. As our goal is to improve employability of our learners, we want to match the skills and the jobs that are in high demand, right? And job markets are usually very, very local. So right now on the accreditation side, since we are France is in Europe, there are equivalences.
Don't remind us.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So subject.
And apparently, our new president will make France stay in Europe. That's a good thing. Yeah. So we have equivalences across 60 countries. So for instance, if you get a bachelor's degree on Open Classrooms, you can apply for a standard on-campus university program in, let's say, Belgium or in Spain for a master's degree, and it's going to be recognized. No worries about that. But if you go to Brazil, let's say, there's no equivalences. So it's a new issue, I think, because so far education was only local, so local students going to local universities and finding local jobs. So that was pretty normal that accreditation was only local. But right now, for instance, we have a student from Burma living in Japan enrolled in an English curriculum leading to a French degree.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's fascinating about the world we live in now, I think. I mean, did you see LinkedIn CEO's panel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yesterday.
I felt that the tone of the panel was very self-congratulatory because they're all friends, so a lot of back-patting. But what was interesting was, the idea about localizing skills. So, being able to sort of geolocate, okay, there's a dip in this kind of skills development for this role, which we know is needed in this town. So then trying to match both of them and having that faster iteration of which skills are needed and which courses are supplied to help try and match that gap. So I don't know, what did you take from the panel? Did you think any parts of it were interesting?
Yes, I think LinkedIn is a very interesting platform. As you said, they have a huge amount of data on users' profiles, on their careers, on their professional experiences, and also on the skills they have, even though skills are only declarative, so you cannot really check what people say on their LinkedIn profile, can you? So maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. So I think the main idea that LinkedIn has to match and close the digital skills gap, for instance, the skills gap in general, I think it's great. So far, I don't see them doing it in an exemplary way, because I think they are sitting on a gold mine basically right now.
So I interviewed the CEO of FutureLearn, Simon Nelson, when I was at South by Southwest, and I think the most popular course on their platform is the English language one from the British Council. I just wondered what you found was the most popular content on your platform.
Mostly around digital skills. So it could be web development, could be data science, could be entrepreneurship. So digital skills, I think, are in really high demand on every single online learning platform right now. And we find that to be true on open classrooms as well. And getting back to your question around closing the skills gap, interestingly, we started to create a new product to try to close that skills gap, trying to bring employers' needs and also job seekers and people in needs to find a good job all together. So right now, you have employers, for instance, wanting to hire like thousands of developers. And we get to them and we tailor a curriculum to their needs, leading to a bachelor's or master's degree. Then we're going to find profiles, students or job seekers or anybody interested in that curriculum, and we're going to train them. But the employer will hire the student from day one. It's going to be like an apprenticeship. So it's an online apprenticeship. So you'll become, as a student, you'll become an employee. But the work contract, you'll be paid from day one. The company will pay the tuition fees for you. So training for free, you're getting paid. You're going to be trained on the job and get an academic degree at the end, a bachelor's or a master's degree, depending on the curriculum. So that kind of mix between academic education, traditional education, but also vocational training and training them on the job. I think this is really interesting to close the skills gap and to make sure that curriculum will be fully aligned with companies' needs. So we are trying to roll out the first beta test on that.
And is that sort of in response to any government initiatives? So in the UK, I mean, we've got something similar around the apprenticeship levy, and I know that you can now do a whole wealth of different things, so including up to, a law degree through that method. I just wondered if it's something you've taken on upon yourself, or if the government have also backed something like that.
Both. Really depends on the country. So for instance, in the UK, or I know in France, in Germany as well, governments are willing to cover the tuition fees when you build apprenticeship programs. So it's costless for companies because usually, for instance, governments or public employment agencies will pay for the training. But in other countries, they don't have such systems. So companies have to pay for the tuition fees or individuals directly. So it really depends on again, it's back to, local regulation.
And what are the top 3 countries where your learners are based?
Right now, it's mainly in Europe, in Africa, in North America. So I'd say France because originally we are based in France. We have a very strong growth from Africa right now, and especially Morocco, for instance. It's been growing like crazy in the last few years, and right now we have 25% of our user base in Africa alone.
So what do you think sparked that? And is it around the digital skills again that you're seeing that?
I think there's a huge lack of infrastructure in Africa, and they have to catch up with the demographics there. So more people are willing to get a college degree. There are more and more people by far compared to Europe or to North America. And there are only a few universities and even fewer great universities or schools. So imagine that in emerging countries like, let's say, India, you have to build 2 universities of 25,000 students every week just to catch up with the demographics.
The demand, and especially because it's a young country, is massive. My other question was, obviously, I was here this week and watched Macron and his acceptance speech. So I just wondered, and you may or may not have an opinion on this, but for those people around the world that aren't so immersed into sort of French politics, I didn't know if you knew his educational policies or digital policies that, may be of interest to the people listening in as well.
Yeah, I think he is really willing to invest a lot on training young people and job seekers right now. So he said it's going to invest 15 billion euros in vocational training for young and job seekers. So let's see if that really going to happen, right? But the interest is there. So it has quite a good analysis on the skills gap and saying that, jobs will change, skills will change. So we need to retrain, reskill, upskill all the workforce, and we need to invest a lot in that. So that is a good thing, definitely. I think is quite aware of the main digital transformation of our industry, of our companies. Again, willing to invest a lot in that. Great things. Like I'm still waiting to see if that's gonna be put in motion in the next couple of months, but it's at least it's enthusiastic to see that program compared to Marine Le Pen's program. So as an entrepreneur, willing to make education more accessible and to be connected with the world, I think we now have a great opportunity with one of the youngest presidents in history. So we'll see.
Because France is always very visible with the France Tech sort of. Is it a hen or a chicken?
It's chicken. Yeah.
A poulet.
Yeah, a poulet, a cock.
But yeah, I mean, I think whereas there were some questions around CES this year, and the UK didn't do something equivalent, and I think. Yeah, I mean, I think the French have been very visible, certainly on the tech side of things, as a brand out there. What's quite interesting is you are in common company with people like Joe and Matthew at Firefly, who are young founders. I don't know if you're familiar with Firefly. It's like
no, I'm not.
Okay, so it's like I suppose similar to Show My Homework or something like that, like a homework or school platform where parents students, teachers can all interact and share content and monitor learning, I suppose. But again, they were I think in their maybe 16, 17, 18 when they developed their platform, and it sort of grew out of something like a passion hobby. And then also George Burgess here with Gojimo, who I think was the most downloaded GCSE app, revision app, and he was very young when he launched that. So I just wondered what that experience was like of taking something which sort of developed organically and that growing into a business, and now you employ, is it 40 people?
Even 70 now.
70, okay.
Plus network of mentors, like individual teachers of 200 people right now. So it's getting larger and larger every single week. But yeah, I can relate to that totally to the theories, since I started when I was 11. Yeah. So I learned to code when I was around 10, and I was willing to, practice my development skills and create a website. And then I started to work with my team, my partner, to create this website and improve this website, where we were publishing online courses on web development at first. And we've been doing so for over 10 years, parallel to our studies, creating more courses, developing more features, setting up like forums, and then collaborative ways of studying and creating new courses. It was really a learning community with many, many members, and it became more and more famous in a way until I got to study engineering. And that was really funny because some of my courses I had at my engineering school were on programming, for instance, and most of my co-workers and colleagues, they were actually studying on my website, and teachers didn't know about it. So
that's very funny.
That was a very cool.
And were you generating any revenue from that? Because that's even more funny if you.
Not much at that time. Yeah. We were just like struggling to pay like hosting fees. For instance, when we were around 16 years old, we had hosting fees of 2,000 or 3,000 euros a month. That is big when you're a student. And I don't come like from a rich family or anything. So
you had enough to kind of pay it just about every time?
Yeah, it was kind of short. We started to add up ads on the website. Sometimes we asked for donation directly to the community, twice or three times, I think. And it worked pretty well. So we managed to stay afloat for several years like that. And at some point when we noticed the MOOC wave back in 2011 or 2012, we thought, okay, this is what we're doing for more than 10 years. We have built a strong community. We have hundreds, thousands of students. We have great courses. We have everything. We have a strong experience, even though we are still pretty young. So we decided to really go for it and go full time and create the venture, raise some money, hire our first employees, create a business model, and try to make the ambition even greater and really go full force on making education more accessible.
And so in terms of people listening in, if they're individuals, they can access it, but also it's for institutions. So for schools and higher ed, or more higher ed and vocational?
Yes, and companies, so students directly. So really large. We have people from 15 to 60 plus. Every course is for free, so you can study for free. It's like a MOOC, basically, with videos, exercises, peer assessment, forums. Certifications, you have to pay for certifications. You can also enroll in degree programs in which you'll have access to an individual mentor via video conference. So a practitioner coaching you, helping you, giving you best practices every single week. Degree programs last from 6 to 12 months usually, so it's very flexible. You can start whenever you want. You can do it in 9 months, in 15 months. It's really up to you. And at the end, you get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. So those are for end users, individuals, and then we work also with schools, universities, and companies to either train their employees, their workforce, to hire some of our graduates, and also to help schools and colleges to digitalize some of their curriculum and use some of our courses to create blended experiences.
And how do you relax?
Well, not so often. No, seriously, I go pretty often in the mountains. I'm a mountain guy. I go mountaineering, climbing, skiing, hiking.
You're not one of those French, like amazing climbers that don't use harnesses or anything. It's always the French. They're like hanging upside down and rock climbing and really good at it.
Yeah. I think there are like amazing climbers in France. So right now we are in Salt Lake City. I'm gonna head tomorrow to Yellowstone National Park.
Nice.
That's going to be amazing. I'm so excited. So
that's a good prize at the end of the event.
It is.
And if people are listening in and they'd like to find out more, how do they go about doing that?
So they can visit openclassrooms.com, definitely, and they can also email me if they want more information. So I have a Twitter handle called P_Debuck, DUBUC, or my email address is Pierre, PIERRE at openclassrooms.com.
Great. All right. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you.
I'm delighted that I'm here with Tom Andriola, who is the CIO and Vice President at the University of California Office of the President, and also the second top 100 social CIO on the show. So I interviewed recently the CIO of the FCC, Dr. David Bray. In fact, maybe that's a good chance to jump straight in, really with the question, why is being a social CIO a thing?
Yeah, well, first of all, our world is become very networked.
Yeah.
And so, I think the thing that CIO, you're a leader, you're a spokesperson, and the question is how do you reach the broad audiences that you're trying to reach with the key messages? And where lots of people use social media for different things. For me, it's more about a messaging platform to reach our constituencies, whether they be inside of our university, but also across our industry. And so we use it as a way to tell great stories, to highlight wonderful things that are happening within the university, the positive impacts that the university is having. So sometimes you'll see some of the things I do in social media are not even about technology per se. Mm-hmm. It's about some fantastic student story that we want to highlight or something that's happening at the university.
What brings you to ASU GSV?
Well, I came for just a day last year. What I saw when I was here made me very intrigued to come back and really dedicate a few days. For me, higher ed is a little bit of a new industry. I spent a majority of my career in healthcare, and the University of California has a lot of healthcare in it. And so when they were looking for a new CIO, they wanted someone who had more of a business acumen, someone who could really help the university think about technology and its impact on the mission of the university. And this particular conference was the intermingling that I usually have tried to go to that shows new ideas, forward thinkers, and people willing to invest money into those new ideas that might somehow change or transform the industry. So I'll be spending the next 3 days here really learning, having lots of conversations, and really immersing myself in the edtech space.
And in a way, in 2009, I launched the Mobile Healthcare Industry Summit. And so I spent a bit of time looking at digital healthcare, and I came over to Washington when they had the digital healthcare event with Bill Gates speaking and the mHealth Alliance. And there are quite some interesting similarities between what EdTech's trying to do and digital healthcare. And I think about, the two cultures colliding. So one's quite traditional, perhaps a bit slower, with the tech scene perhaps being a bit more sort of forward-looking. You've got the issues of data privacy and all of those sort of salient discussions that I think there is some similarity across both what's happening with digital healthcare and what's happening with education technology as well?
Yeah, I think there's lots. And I actually just did an article on this recently in terms of my long history in healthcare and some of the analogs I see happening in education. Certainly, you mentioned one, privacy, right? Just in terms of as we generate more data, there's so many questions about appropriate uses of the data. And whether the data is inside the context of I'll just call it the institution, or other data that floats around, especially around, the millennials and the Gen Zs who live in this world of social media and are generating tons of data around what's going on with their lives. And is that appropriate to use in the context of trying to help them in their educational experience at a university campus? The other thing is that I've watched healthcare go through that I think education is heading towards is education is going to come to understand that it is actually a data-driven industry. And it comes in waves in terms of we find the data intrusive because we want to focus on the mission of teaching and learning or research in the case of faculty. But then as people start to look at the data and gain insights to them, they learn to figure out how they can use it to improve upon what they do. Because I know that in my working with the faculty, they're perfectionists. They really care about what they do. They want to be the best at what they do, whether it's in their lab or in the classroom. And at some point, I think they'll start to look at the data in terms of how is this going to help me be the best that I can be in whatever form I'm trying to do it in.
That's very interesting. So the idea of a lecturer sort of leaning on their lesson plans or resources that they've rolled out for the last 10 years isn't really going to happen anymore, because, if you've got a way to check where students really lock onto an idea or where they drop off, and you've got the ability to change and iterate that, then the pressure is going to be on doing that, not kind of having this sort of static lesson plan.
Yeah, it's a much more dynamic world. Just overall, it's a more dynamic world. If you have children today and you compare how you grew up in a much more linear fashion in the way that you're trying to navigate and help your children. And so I think that permeates so many different parts of our lives. And so, I think one of the things that, that people in the classroom struggle with now is how to embrace the dynamic nature of things and, where there's high interest level, how to go with it versus staying with this very, very structured plan. One of the things in being in technology is I get to see all the advances around just computing, the ability to actually, grab all this data, aggregate it, analyze it, and actually make these real-time recommendations, things that other industries are doing that I think will find their way into education, in the time frame and in the form that are appropriate. Because it is an industry that is, it has a lot of history and institutional knowledge that comes with it. And that's not a bad thing. It's just something that has to be incorporated into how change happens.
Yeah, so a really interesting tweet earlier, which was like, edtech companies who think your product's really great, don't think you won't have to, revise it quite seriously for higher education to consider taking it on.
Yeah.
And, you can't just kind of crowbar it in there. So one question, someone with your job title, I'm sure, is constantly, contacted by tech companies saying like, look at our new thing. And, so that must present its own challenges. And if you had a message to those people listening in that, are from that side of the spectrum, so tech companies, and especially those working with higher education, what would your message to them be?
Yeah, create success at a small scale. And then work upstream. This industry is not about big contracts. They happen, but they're rare. Much more, especially in the edtech space, I've learned things working even at individual faculty level that expand then to a dozen faculty that then a department adopts, and then an entire campus adopts. That's what works in higher ed. It really is. There's a peer-to-peer selling that happens in this particular industry that you have to embrace. Healthcare has it too, which is where I first learned it. And as I come over here and working with faculty, I joke a lot of times, like, faculty don't want to hear from me, someone on administration, about a great tool. They want to hear from one of their peers. And so there's a lot of peer-to-peer selling. And I see my role as being much more of a facilitator of good things that are happening and how do we spread them more quickly, rather than being the one introducing the new idea.
And do you participate in any kind of Twitter chats around these kind of issues? Because I know in the UK we have things like LTHE chat, like Learning Technology for Higher Education chat, and things things like that. And I don't know if it's also an area where people kind of share those tools that they kind of really get into.
Yeah, I don't personally, but we have, we being 10 research universities, right? We have a very, very broad community of people, and we probably have somewhere between 500 and 750 people who are in the edtech space alone. And those people are involved in lots of, national committees, Twitter conversations, and we actually try to generate those in terms of being very, very kind of vocal and out there. And I like to see us leading conversations rather than following conversations.
I think that's really interesting as well that you mentioned it is that, start small scale, grow it organically, because I think a lot of people listening in, I think the appeal, certainly with higher education, is that you can get this big institutional win. And I know, you've got the big managed services providers, and perhaps if they're looking at edtech, it doesn't make sense for them if they're looking at smaller scale, or it's certainly K-12 if it's not, a centralized system. So it's quite, I think it's quite refreshing to hear that actually it's the same. It works by trust in an educator, and they pass on sort of word of mouth marketing, and that's the way it kind of works best.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing I focus on is not trying to change that, but figuring out how to accelerate it. Right? If we can get from, first adoption to 50 faculty using it, and if I could cut that time in half, that is, the essence of innovation, the acceleration that I'm looking to try to create from what my office does.
Interesting. And so if people are listening in and they'd like to connect with you, it's Andreola_UC, is that right?
Yeah, in terms of my Twitter handle.
Okay,
yes.
Great. And just finally, so are there any resources, people, or books that have had an impact on you, so how you think or what you go back to?
Yeah, I'm not, in terms of books, it's, I'm not a big reader today in terms of, books. I mean, I read a lot of articles, but I find, and that's why spending 3 days here is going to be so much fun. I find that the individual conversations or listening to thought leaders who push my thinking, again, I'm 3 years into working in higher education. I'm still learning a lot, right? I really enjoy when I go to our campuses and being able to sit down and have lunch with faculty. I even have developed some working collaborations with them where my knowledge of technology and their knowledge of a particular domain, where the fusion of that is pushing us into a new space. So I've got some really, really great, let's call it relationships with institutes on our campuses that allow me to be influenced by them while me bringing something to the table.
That's good. That's the kind of sort of symbiotic relationship you want, really.
Yeah, and it's sometimes it's hard for people on the administrative side to have that relationship with faculty. I identified pretty quickly that it was going to be important to build trusted bonds with some key faculty members, some of the thought leaders who are doing interesting things with technology. And so, I found ways to connect with them and to really have common interests and to propose things with them it's been a lot of fun. It's been a great learning experience for me. And it continues to help me get my name out there in this industry.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Tom, thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, that brings us to the end of this second episode from the 10-part ASU GSV Summit series. Don't forget to sign up to our newsletter to find out about upcoming meetup drinks, cool jobs currently circulating, and other announcements. I do hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Send us your feedback on Twitter to either @PodcastEdTech or @ASU GSV Summit, and come back next time for our following episode on efficacy and impact.